Hey there, and welcome to another Simple Truth. Last week I challenged you with the idea of this is not your church. And as I imagined, the pushback, the questions, the concern whether I am still mentally sane or not have come up. And that's good. That's part of what we're doing down here in Drash Ministries is attempting to challenge your thinking and get you to either think differently or reinforce what you think and have you able to not defend it, but to clearly articulate it. The problem is most of us get caught up defending what we believe instead of articulating what we believe. God has not asked us to defend. When God hit me over the head with this is not your church, I'm not to defend that. I'm just to figure out how to clearly articulate that to the people of Lakeview Community Church that I serve at, to the people down here at the Epicenter that I serve at, to you who listen to A Simple Truth. And in articulating, I need to continually be being challenged. One of the great things about being able to have a point of view is that as you share that, it keeps getting refined. You keep thinking it through. You keep applying it and seeing what comes back. It's that idea of fishing where, we continually cast our lure out into the water and then we reel it in slowly and figure out what comes back. Does anything attach? And then we look at what we've caught and we decide what we're going to do with it. Because not everything we catch are we going to keep. Not everything that we catch is usable. Some of it's out of season. Some of it's too small. Some of it we've just decided that we don't have a use for, so we put it back for someone else. And that's the same thing with information. Do you know that there are things that people respond with that I have no use for? It's not relevant for me. It's relevant for them. It's relevant for what they're doing. It's relevant for their lives. But it's not necessarily relevant for mine. And we have to be careful with that. Because we tend to think that whatever is relevant for my life is relevant for someone else's. We have an entire culture that's based on that right now. A culture that says if you don't think the way I think, if you don't apply the way I apply, well, then you're in trouble. The problem with that is that they're not applying moral standards. They're applying preferences, that which makes sense to them. And I want to challenge you today with that idea. Are you applying moral standards to your life? Are you holding other people accountable to moral standards? Or are you holding them accountable to preferences? You see, preferences can change. They change in situations over and over. I and other pastors, and you probably in your life, run into people who are staunchly against something one minute and staunchly for it the next minute. Why is that? Because somebody usually close to them, if not themselves, is going through something. It's amazing to me, the people that believe everybody who does something wrong should be in jail. Everybody who does something wrong should be stoned until themselves or one of their children or somebody close to them does something wrong. And then it becomes about the exceptions to the rule. It's what creates the hypocrisy in Christianity. God has no exceptions to the rule. He legislates moral standards, and he expects that you and I are going to hold to those. But the truth is that God knows that you and I, well, we're just not going to be able to uphold those standards all the time. That for a myriad of reasons, you and I are going to fall. We're going to come below that standard. We could have our fingers right on the tip and just suddenly watch them slip away, or we could be far away from the standard. But either way, God knows that that's what's going to happen. And so rather than continually punishing us for that, God looked down and said, I'm going to make a way for you to reach it and stay above that standard. And that is in the person of Jesus. But God he never lowers his standards. You and I do. You see, we look at something, and when we know we haven't reached it, we decide that we need to lower it for ourselves while not lowering it for other people, and that creates the hypocrisy. What's right for me isn't right for you. The Bible talks about that. The Bible says that in the Old Testament days, when there were judges, that people did what was right in their own sight. You see, most of us, we judge other people by what's right in our own sight. But that standard moves all the time. That standard moves depending, again, on what I go through and what those I love go through. And so 1 minute I'm adamantly against this. The next minute I'm not against this. You see, in this whole concept of this is not your church, this is an important concept. God says it's not your standards. It's my standards. And you know, the truth is that all of us read the Bible and we all come across standards that God says are his standards that we somehow want to lower. Oh, we are against the big ones. And we point them out in church, and we discipline appropriately, and we destroy people because of those. But we don't have the same standard that God has for lying, for stealing, for gossiping, for gluttony, for all kinds of other things that God says are abominations. You see, if we look at that list of things that God says he really doesn't have a stomach for, it's far more than just homosexuality, adultery, murder, divorce. That list also includes some everyday things. Those who consistently are causing division. Those who consistently are gossiping. Those who consistently are lying. Those who are consistently stealing from God. That list is twofold. God says that standard isn't going to change. You see, when it's yours and my church, we set whatever standards we want, and that's sadly what most of our churches have done. We choose the standards that we're going to uphold, and we also use as scapegoats things like insurance. We tell people that we would love to be for them, but our insurance tells us we can't. Imagine standing up in front of God and trying to use that excuse. Somebody else told me, a secular outside organization that's all about money, told me that we couldn't do what you asked us to do, that we couldn't restore people. Imagine that. Because it seems to me that in the time of Paul, when he was Saul, the liability insurance would have come up and said, no, you can't use him. He's killed too many people. Imagine if God was ran by insurance companies. You see, when it's yours and my church, we can be run by insurance companies. What makes sense to us. We live in this fear that people can take away and can stop the work that God is doing. You see, when it's yours and my church, we believe that a threat to the buildings, a threat to the financial health and wealth of our church, well, that just can't be. And God says, I don't care. What I care about is you keeping right, godly principles, that you hunger and you thirst for righteousness. You see, God doesn't lessen his standards to include you and I. He made a way. As I say frequently, don't cheapen what Jesus did for us. Don't make it Jesus and. So again, this isn't your church.